Good evening and welcome to this year's Yom HaShoah commemoration. Every year on this day, the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center pays tribute to the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust to honor their memory and ensure that they are never forgotten. As with so many other things, this year is somewhat different, as our usual commemorative event had to be moved online. In consequence, we decided to make this virtual commemoration as meaningful as possible. We are delighted that Holocaust survivor Anita Lasker-Wallfisch accepted our invitation to share her remarkable story with us. She joins us tonight from her home in London. Yom HaShoah is a day of immense importance and significance. In 1959, the Knesset passed a law mandating that the 27th of Nisan would be designated as the Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day. Every year on this day, at 10 o'clock sharp, air raid sirens sound, and people all across Israel pause in their daily interactions to stand still for a 2 minute of silence. Yom HaShoah is a reminder of the horrors the Jews of Europe had to endure at the hand of Germany and its allies. It is also a reminder of the remarkable courage of the Jewish resistance fighting against the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of April-May 1943. Their heroism is inspiration to us all. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening. I'm truly delighted and honoured to welcome as our guest speaker this evening a remarkable woman who not only experienced and survived both Auschwitz-Birkenau and Bergen-Belsen, but who went on to create a new life for herself in the United Kingdom after the war, where she became a leading figure in British music, a founder of the English Chamber Orchestra and the matriarch of a musical dynasty. Anita Lasker-Wallfisch was born in Breslau in Germany in 1925, her father a lawyer, her mother a violinist, she the youngest of 3 sisters. After living an early life typical of many German Jews, high culture of music and literature, that world was torn apart by the rise of Hitler in 1933. Tonight, we are enormously privileged to talk to Mrs. Lasker-Wallfisch in London. Mrs. Lasker-Wallfisch, as you know, this is an interview Q&A session for Yom HaShoah, which we are doing virtually here in Hong Kong, Macau. And so if you allow me, we'll just have a conversation about your extraordinarily...
Yes. Yeah.
So can we just start at the beginning about, because in many ways you represent that ideal German Jewish life. You know, when one thinks of German Jewry, there's this almost idyllic image of high culture, the people who were very common in the professions, etc., etc. So when you were born in 1925, you were born into, in one way, a very turbulent time. It was the Weimar Republic. But at the same time, you were born into this incredible period of well, you were born into German Jewry. At what point, because you were a very little girl, you were only 7, I think, when Hitler came to power. At what point did you actually realize that things were going seriously wrong?
Well, I had a little incident in the private school that I visited when I wanted to wipe the blackboard, and a child said, "Don't give the Jews the spice." That's how I learned that I was a Jew, that it was a problem.
And your parents explained?
Well, my parents tried to explain to me what it was to be a Jew. It's not very easy anyway. No. And yeah, that's how it happened, you know. Suddenly I was different from other people.
Mm-hmm. One of the things which struck me, I recently reread your very fine book. And one of the things which struck me is just how extraordinary it was that you and your family somehow managed to, despite everything, maintain a lifestyle. You carried on, you went to Berlin to learn the cello, you carried on.
It was a sort of pretense and hope that it'll pass.
Mm.
Even this will pass, you know. The Germans can't be that stupid, that's my father said. Well, he was wrong.
Yeah, I suppose that the Jews have a history of keep your head down and things will pass. And obviously on this occasion, things were rather different. But still, I mean, I'm struck by, because you were clearly a very close family, 3 sisters, almost like a Chekhov play, these 3 sisters. They're very loving parents. So when your parents were arrested, in your book, you don't write about it very much, but it must have been devastating.
Of course it was devastating.
Not just the rest of your parents, that clearly is devastating, but how you and Renata then just had to somehow cope.
I know. I mean, I'm just as surprised as you are. It was just a matter of battling on.
Mm-hmm.
Battle. Would be that, you know.
Yeah. It was
giving in spite of everything.
And somehow continuing, not giving up.
Yeah, and of course we were very lucky in very many ways, you know, because German system was very stupid. But I still have an idea, but I'll never be sure, that one of the colleagues of my father's, who was not a Nazi, tried to help behind the scenes.
Is this the Count?
You know,
this is the Count you mentioned in your book?
No, not the Count. I think it was, the Count was for my father a possibility to continue working whilst lawyers were no longer allowed to work. But this particular Count had a lawsuit with my father since, I don't know, 20 years. And he knew that nobody can take that over. So he got special permission from the Gestapo that Lasker can continue your case, but nothing else. So that's what happened. But I have a feeling that a colleague of my father, I will never be sure, but I have a feeling, knew that it was better to be a criminal than to be a Jew. A criminal got got a court case. A Jew is nothing. A Jew gets eliminated. That's the only explanation I have why we were suddenly not Jews as number one, but criminals as number one, because criminals are put in prison. And then, you know, in Germany, in spite of the complete chaos, everything has to go according to, certain schemes. So we became criminals, which was very useful because it saved us a year in Auschwitz. I mean, we would have never have survived. You know, we were put in prison to wait for a trial. I mean, it's a completely crazy trial anyway, but that's how it panned out in the end.
Sure, I mean, certainly reading your book, there is this. The book is obviously full of irony, but one of the great ironies is that, you know, you're better off as a criminal than you are as a Jew, and that you know it's your criminal record which saved your life, really, rather than anything else.
Absolutely.
Purely just as not as a joke, but just as a matter of curiosity, do you still have a criminal record in Germany as far as
I was quite interested. I was interested when I went to Germany for the first time whether I still have a criminal record, but I don't seem to have one. Lucky.
You served your time. Well, one of the features of your book, and I think probably of you as a person, is understatement. I mean, your book describes unspeakable horror, and yet you yourself are extremely understated in your descriptions of what happened to you, such as your experiences in prison in Breslau, and then arrival in Auschwitz. And clearly, none of us who were not there could even ever begin to imagine 1% of what Auschwitz was like. And I'm not going to even try and ask you to describe it, but I am going to ask you, I know you must talk about this so often, but clearly I am fascinated by the by the women's orchestra in Auschwitz. And I'm sorry to have to ask you to talk about it again, but can you tell us something about Alma Rosé, who sounds like an extraordinary woman? And also, which I think is extraordinary, is how one of the most awful women on God's earth, Marie Mendel.
Well, I'm afraid you've cut out for a bit. I don't know whether I missed anything.
So I'm just amazed. You know, we were talking about the orchestra and how somebody like Marie Mendel, who was, who's a monster, how she nonetheless played quite an important part in the orchestra. Was she a music lover, or what motivated Marie Mendel?
I think what motivated her is jealousy of all the other camps who had bands. Yes, I think she thought to herself, every single camp, and I didn't even know that till after the war, had a band.
Right.
And didn't have a band. They shouldn't I have it, I think. And luckily, she succeeded in realizing her ambition that she also wants music in the camp. You mustn't forget those days were very drab. There was no television, no anything. It was awful, So let's have a band. And she had this brilliant idea, which saved a lot of people's lives in the end.
I mean, one once heard, because one's read about you and Fania Fenelon and others. So one's often heard a lot about the women's orchestra. Was the men's orchestra as active, or?
But it was totally different. The men's orchestra were all professional musicians. We were just kids, Right. It was a totally different. The men's orchestra was a proper orchestra. We were nothing. We were a bunch of kids who sometimes in their childhood learned an instrument. There were about 5 people who could play their instruments properly.
But okay, despite the fact that most of you were just kids, nonetheless you had this extraordinarily severe concertmaster, as it were, or conductor, Alma Rosé. She sounded obviously brilliant, but terrible.
Well, she was desperate. She was desperate to create. She knew that if she succeeds to create something acceptable, it would at least stay the execution. She was desperate, and it was an extremely difficult task to actually produce anything. I mean, she was, people say she was strict. She was desperate and successful.
So it's after all, purely on a practical level, just things like sheet music. Did they supply you with paper and you'd have to transcribe the music yourself?
Absolutely everything. The people who played so badly that they couldn't possibly be part of the thing were made Notenschreiberin,
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. And yes, it was a mammoth task. It's unthinkable how she succeeded.
Because again, I know this is a question which you've been asked many, many times, and I'm sorry to have to keep asking you about it, but it is something which puzzles everyone, is how music, and how we all associate music with something which is transcendent and beautiful, and yet the great irony is that Reinhard Heydrich, by all accounts, was a brilliant violinist, and Hans Frank was a very talented musician, and you write in your book that I think maybe the first time you met Mengele was when he comes to listen to Schumann's Traumerei. So these monsters and Marie Mendel herself are somehow, whatever motivated her, we don't know, but it is truly hard to grasp how music and these people are connected with each other.
Yeah. I think that is the big mystery, that these people were not idiots, Yeah, that is a total mystery. I mean, you mentioned Heydrich, you mentioned Mengele, who knew that Schumann wrote a piece called the Träumerei. That is the tragedy. These were not idiots. I mean, these are all people, of course, who did not soil their hands. They made the Untermenschen, do the dirty work. But how can educated people take part in this monstrous undertaking of getting rid of all the Jews in the world? Yeah.
And that's what strikes one when one looks at the Wannsee conference. I think it was 8 of the 15 men were PhDs, and mostly in law. Again, so I mean, one of the things the Holocaust teaches one, if it teaches one anything, is that education is not improving. There's nothing positive about PhDs and education in the way we assume. But sticking with music for the moment, it's a question I'm just curious to know. And I know you said somewhere, I forget where, that the fact that Mengele liked Schumann doesn't make Schumann any less pleasant for you. But are there particular pieces of music that you cannot bear to play, which perhaps you were forced to play? Are there bits of German kitsch which you were forced to play now?
No, I live in two worlds. That is one world. No, listen, if I was that sensitive, I don't think I would be living today. But no, that makes...
I noticed in the concert program, when you played in a concert after liberation in Bergen-Belsen, one of the pieces you play is Schumann's Träumerei. Was that a deliberate choice? Was that a deliberate, or was that just
that's all I
came to mind?
I think that's all I had in my repertoire. You know, that was such a crazy ensemble that we had there. Yeah, no, that, you know, I don't, one world does not connect with the other for me.
How have you managed that?
I don't know.
And you have
survival instinct.
Well, that's the other thing I really wanted to ask you. I mean, you re-met the man who became your husband. He was somebody you knew as a teenager in Breslau. You meet again after the war. He becomes your husband. Did you and he speak German? Did you make a decision not to speak German? I mean, I know some survivors never spoke German again. Others didn't mind. Some people, you know, was that a decision for you? Did you
no.
as a married couple with German, something which was part of your lives, or?
No, my daughter complains that there were two languages in our house. One was music and one was German, and neither of which she understood. We must have spoken to German when we didn't want the children to understand it. I can't really remember.
Right, so there was never a conscious decision.
No, but I mean, to speak German, you know, if I was that sensitive, I wouldn't have survived to speak German. I didn't, in my second life, connect anything with the other life, if you see what I mean. I did not live in the past. I was busy trying to make a life.
Mm-hmm. But it's if you don't mind, I'd like you to stick with the German question for a moment, because when you were in prison in Breslau, there is, as it were, one good person, somebody called Miss Neubert, Dolly Neubert, who treats you well. I mean, she's not a Nazi, and she comes for these little painted soldiers. Was that some sort of way for you to maintain a basic respect or a basic optimism in humanity, that there was this one?
Probably. I'm still in touch with her family now.
Wow. When did she die? Did she live long after the war, do you know? Or
unfortunately, you see, when I started going back to Germany many years after the event, I was always hoping to find her somehow, but I never did. But I did a BBC program with my sister, which is watched by millions of people, and she surfaced again. Not she, but her daughter. Unfortunately, she died. But she was, when that program came on, she said, "Oh, these girls, they won't remember me." Of course, I remember her. I'll never forget her. But I'm very happy to be in touch, very close touch with her,
with her family,
with her daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
It really, I suppose the other thing which I'm developing that and really wanting to know more, if I may, not in your book, but this is obviously later in your life, but I think in your Wikipedia page and elsewhere, I've read that you, I'm not sure when, that you became very interested and involved in the Neue Kreisau circle, Freya von Moltke. And I'm just curious about, this is interesting. Is this some sort of rapprochement between you and the good Germans?
No, that happened sort of completely simultaneously with anything. We were suddenly approached by.
I've lost you.
That was my daughter trying to get in touch.
Okay. Sorry, you were approached simultaneously by.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened really. Why, I can't tell you. But I'm a member of this Kreisau thing. But that's completely, yeah, it's nothing to do with. I don't know. That just came out of the blue.
I'm going to read a short passage from your book, which I found a very powerful passage because it's actually written. It's a letter to your sister Mariana in London in 1945. It's about 6-7 weeks after liberation, and it's a very powerful passage where you write, I've recently been in Hanover and also in Hamburg. It gives me no pleasure to see such total devastation. However much I hate the Germans, and yes, I do hate them without exception, if you can grasp what hating means. And then you go on to talk about, but then you go on how you are devastated by the destruction. When I drove through Hamburg, I felt ashamed, not for myself, not for Germany. I feel nothing for Germany, but for the human race. I feel ashamed for the whole human race. And I found that profoundly moving for somebody who is 19 years old, that you that you manage to see this as the failure of humanity, not simply as.
Well, it was.
As one.
The war is a failure of humanity. I mean, when it comes to that.
So how did you eventually go back to Germany?
Well, that was also completely accidental and not planned, but it was almost as though it was planned. Because, as you know, as a musician, I belong to an orchestra that we played all over the world.
The English Chamber Orchestra.
And every month we got sort of what we are supposed to do. We go to America, we go to France, blah, 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 go to Germany. I never went to Germany, no problem. Then somebody else came. But once on this list were the names of 2 towns very near Belsen. One of them is called Celle and the other Soltau. Right. And I decided there that I would like to just have a look what has happened to Belsen. This is how it happened, how it started. So I told the orchestra that this time I'm coming with you, and they were very scared. They thought I would shoot everybody. I said, not at all, I won't even talk to a German. So we arrived in Celle, where the first concert was supposed to be, and as it happens, the music stands hadn't arrived. So we sat and waited, and I don't know why, but news must have gone around that the lady who sits there, she's an old survivor of Belsen. Said, anyway, I was approached by a young man, obviously a German, who said to me, I hear you want to go to Belsen. You need a car for that, see? Could I drive you? And there I had, somewhere I had to make up my mind. I'm in Germany. I wasn't going to talk to any Germans, but there is a German in front of me. What do I do? So I did what one doesn't normally do. I asked him how old he was. And he was born after the war. So I had this sort of brainwave, really. A man that was born after the war can't tell me that he wasn't a Nazi, because he wasn't even there. Mm-hmm. And this man, although I later found out that he was in charge of this musical affair there, became not only a close friend, but my driver. He drove me everywhere. So it just shows you how stupid it is to, he's German, I hate him, you know. We are still in touch now. So he was really the catalyst of, and he drove me all over the place. I mean, he became absolutely my chauffeur. Yeah.
When was that? Which that was in the 1990s?
It must be the late early 80s, I suppose.
It's quite a while ago. Right.
Yeah, must have been around then. I'm not very good with dates.
And I know you accompanied Her Majesty the Queen around Belsen in 2015. Have in between that and the Queen's visit, had you been back on other visits, or was that enough for you?
On other visits, what visits?
To Belsen.
Well, I mean, at the moment, I have to give interviews over the phone. I mean, they wanted me to come to Belsen now, but there'll be a Zoom thing. You know, I do it now from home. It's much more comfortable.
And I presume you have been back to Auschwitz?
Many times.
But that was quite soon after, or again only from the 80s onwards, or?
And wasn't, well, first time I went back, the wall was still up.
Right. Okay. So before that.
But in the meantime, I've been many times for television things, interviews, and God knows what. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Again, going back to your book, one of the frustrations you write about, again, in some way sticking with your German background, is how unfair it was that after the war, you were almost punished for being a German Jew, that you were an enemy alien when you first arrived.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do they know? These are just little.
Yeah. But I mean, something I really do cannot. I mean, I find hard to conceive. How does somebody like yourself and your sister? How do you start again? I mean, you have nothing. You have the dress on your back, and you got a little bit of money from the United Nations refugee people. I mean, how on earth do you begin?
Well, I mean, when we finally arrived in England, of course, I stayed with relatives.
In that sense, you were slightly fortunate. You had relatives, but I mean, so many people didn't. And one thinks today about the enormous refugee crisis, and it's just it is impossible to imagine how people do arrive in a strange country and somehow start a new life. I mean, it's something which is
but I very quickly got into musical circles. I can't really remember how it all happened. It was not really a problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So unlike your elder sister, you were never driven to go to make Aliyah and go to Israel.
No,
that was clearly your elder sister was quite a fervent side.
Completely different, yes.
But that wasn't who you were. Right. Towards the end of your book, you write, and this is carrying on what you just said, I'm just quoting from your book. You say, "I've never regretted for one moment that I came to England to start my new life. I've made my home here and I've a great deal to be thankful for. But that is another story." That's, I think, the second or third last paragraph of your book. May I ask, will we be given that other story? Do you have another volume somewhere which you're going to share with us?
Would you say that question again?
Are you going to give us part 2 of your memoirs?
Everybody asked me to, but I don't think so.
Come on, this takes us to 1946. There's so much more we want to know. No, you don't?
I don't think so, no.
Really?
Well, I certainly had a very interesting life even afterwards, yeah.
It's fascinating. A few years ago, I was watching that very difficult film, Night Will Fall, of the footage from the liberation of the camps. And there's footage of you speaking to British soldiers sometime in 1945, obviously some months after the liberation, because you're looking quite happy. Do you remember that film? Do you remember appearing in BBC?
Let me tell you something. This is not me talking. It's my sister Renate talking. I was very, very cross with lots of things which, in a slapdish sort of way, they don't think it's important. It's not me talking, it's Renate talking. And also there is a picture of 3 girls walking into the camp.
Yes, yeah.
That said, it's my sister and I. It's not my sister, this is in fact me. So I was very cross with them because they're very, they're very cavalier with, yeah. Anyway.
Okay. No, so I was intrigued, and what you.
No, that was not me.
What you? Okay. Well, I'm glad I checked up on that. Thank you for that. I haven't asked you very much. I'm ready because I want you to not just talk about the camps, and I'm going to finish quite soon. But I'd like to go back perhaps to the camps because this is Yom HaShoah. Music, your life has been saved by music, quite literally. From what you said to the girl in the sauna, I was a cello player, and that was literally what saved your life. And it seems on other occasions, your life has been saved as well, and you were very courageous and a certain amount of chutzpah going to Marie Mendel and asking her to give your sister that job.
That was chutzpah, yeah.
And that I think was chutzpah. Can you say something about how where did it come from? This courage to go up to this woman, Marie Mendel, of whom we only who is clearly someone.
It's a good question. I've often been asked that question. I don't think I've never ever, when I was cursed and called terrible names like Dreckstück, Dreckjude, I never felt addressed because I'm not that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I probably have to thank my upbringing for that. I have a chutzpah, a complete conscious that I'm not a dirty Jew. I'm just a person. And the person who calls me that is the dirty one, not I. I didn't feel addressed. It's chutzpah, but I don't know where that comes from.
It worked. You talk also about how Irma Grazer tried to befriend you in the closing days of
yes, I mean that's pathetic.
When you went to as a witness in the Belsen trial, did she look at you? Was she hoping that you might do something for her? What
maybe
did you actually expect?
Maybe I don't know. It was rather nice to be on the other side of the fence, I can tell you.
No, I'm sure it must be.
But I mean, I have nothing to say to praise her for. She was an absolute monster, that woman. But then on the other hand, she was a completely stupid young thing. And the Germans sort of recruited people who had, who had menial jobs with a sort of temptation. I can give you a better job if you will have boots and you'll have a dog and a uniform. Why not? I don't think she ever met a Jewish person in her life. She came from some village somewhere. She was offered a better job and she took it. And by God, she enjoyed it.
Yeah, but that's still very difficult to understand how one can sink to those depths. Hard. Just finally, you've been very active in the last 20 years, perhaps, in talking about your life, I know, in Germany and elsewhere. I belong to a Holocaust center in Hong Kong. We're involved in Holocaust education. Do you think Holocaust education works? Do you think we can make people?
No, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and it's very dangerous. There is a tendency now to put all the genocides into one pot, like Rwanda, Holocaust, Darfur, whatever. No. There hasn't been there have been lots of genocides, and they're still going on whilst we're talking, but never have people been recycled. Mm-hmm. We were turned into soap, into into lampshades, into God knows what.
Yeah.
Never be distracted. So I think what we need to do, whether it'll help, I don't know or not, is to teach Jewish history, to actually try and explain the almost inexplicable Jews. We're not, you can't put us all in one pot. There's Sephardic one and Ashkenazi ones. People don't know about that. In fact, I mean, I have a lot of chance to talk with teachers, etc. Even history teachers have no idea that there was a time when Jews were not allowed to have professions other than moneylenders, tavern keepers, and what else were they allowed to do?
They were allowed to be tanners because it was a just
yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, that was news, you see. And when suddenly it got a little bit better for Jews, that was the Jews that were exploited. In fact, what you reproach Jews with has been done to Jews, because when Jews were finally allowed to move out of the ghetto or wherever they were, not into towns, but near the towns, if they paid double taxes, etc. You probably know all that. You see, I mean, what Jews are reproached with has been done to Jews, and that is not knowledge that is generally taught.
Yeah, because I mean, there's something which I do think about a lot is, you know, we talk about Holocaust history and teaching the lessons of the Holocaust, and I just wonder what those lessons are, if there is such a thing as lessons of the Holocaust, and how we can be more effective.
Well, I think the lessons are, if there are any lessons, to explain who these particular people of Jewish origin are. You don't have to love them, but you don't murder them.
Yeah, but
yeah, you can't force people to love Jewish people if they are basically anti-Semitic, but don't kill them, because I mean, if you believe in God and God has created us, they've also created these funny people who are called Jews.
True. But I mean, one of the interesting things about living in Asia is obviously people have far less knowledge of Jews, far less. I mean, not that it means they're without preconceived ideas. There are certainly some preconceived about even you know, like in England, there were no Jews for 300 or 400 years after 1290. They didn't stop people having very clear ideas about what Jews were. And that is the extraordinary thing, how the reputation or the image of the Jew is everywhere.
I know, but this is just to have an excuse to hate them. I mean, of course, there are some very wealthy Jews, but there are some very wealthy
people too. Yeah.
Aryans. Yes, I mean, we don't talk about them, but we cannot win somehow, because everybody seems to need somebody to blame for all the ills of the world. Nothing new. It's been going on for centuries. But don't make a material out of us, you know.
Yeah.
Recycled. We have been recycled, and that has never happened before. And if you lump all the genocides together, you denigrate the you know, what happened to the Jews. You denigrate it. You cannot compare it with Rwanda. A Rwandan person can walk in the street now totally unmolested. A boy with a capel, with a yarmulke, is in danger. I mean, what is this?
Even in London in 2021. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I don't know whether we have solved the big questions, but
no,
we have to try.
But thank you very much for giving up your afternoon to speak to me.
Well, I'm very glad
I will send you the link. I will send you the link once it's all put together.
Okay.
Before you go, just tell me, you are extraordinarily, you're a musical dynasty. I mean, it's you, your son Raphael, grandson Simon, is it?
Simon and Ben and Joanna all musicians.
And Raphael, I know, is a cellist. Simon, also a cellist.
Simon is a cellist and a singer.
Right. And
Benjamin is a composer. He lives in Los Angeles. And Joanna also lives in Los Angeles, and she's a bit of everything. She composes, she sings, and yes, they're all musicians.
quite
I
extraordinary.
have another grandson who was a very, very fine cellist, but gave it up and is now a bit of a lost soul.
Well, I hope
Doesn't quite know what to do.
Did the chess gene pass down through Uncle Ed?
Not really, not really, no. I know my great-granddaughter, Joanna, not Joanna, what's her name? Alma, likes chess. So maybe it'll come out somewhere.
Okay. Really, there can be few families where the cello is just, it forms, as your daughter says, either music or German in the household, and she's either. Thank you so much.
Nice meeting you.
Really appreciate it, and I hope to see you with Trudy sometime when we allow.
Yeah, and I'm glad it worked out.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lasker-Wallfisch.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We will now say the memorial prayer as we remember the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust. We remember also all those survivors who have since joined their brethren under the wings of the Almighty. This will be followed by Kaddish, and I ask you all, wherever you are, to please stand and observe a minute's silence as we remember them not as 6 million, but each Jewish soul as one individual person whose life was cut short and whose loss we mourn today, every day, and for all time. El male rachamim shochen bamromim ametze menucha nechona al kanfei hashchina b'malot kedushim uteorim kizohara kiem mazhirim את כל הנשמות של 6 מיליוני יהודים, חללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו שנשחטו, שנשרפו, ושנספו על קידוש השם. בידי המרצחים, הגרמנים הנאצים, ועוזריהם משאר העמים. לכן ברחמים, יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימין, ונאמר אמן. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועל מה דברי איכותי, והמליך מלכותי, וצמח פורקני כמשיחי, וחייכון וביומכון, וחי לכל בית ישראל, עגלה בזמן קריב עמו אמן. יהי שמי רבה, מבורך לעולם ומעלמיה, יתבורך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודש הבריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, גם אירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רב מן שמיים וחיים טובים, עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו וכל ישראל ואמרו אמן.